Stanley analyst out there who's saying that they think the bull market is already over. All right, here we go. Saying and writing, and I quote, "We are in a bear market." While 2018 is clearly not a year of recession, the market is speaking loudly that bad news is coming. I'm going to say, first of all, I think there is occasionally this divorce, right, between the markets and the economy overall.
We sure see that now,
because you've got strong fundamentals, right? We've got low unemployment. We've got wages finally going up a little bit. We've got GDP growing at a decent clip. But what this analyst is effectively saying is that there's more bad news coming. So my question
coming on the economy?
Is it the economy or the markets?
Yeah.
Because they are kind of different,
right,
aren't they, Steve?
Well, there's a lot
related,
of...
but
there was a report out earlier this week by this economist at Goldman Sachs who says the economy is going to grow less than 2% next year. I think that's completely false. I mean, I think I'm looking at the fundamentals of the economy, and they look so strong. Industrial production is good. Manufacturing is good. Construction is good. You know, why would there be this slowdown? I'll tell you one area where I agree with Donald Trump, by the way. I think he was exactly right. The Fed tightened too much, and this ascent that they're talking about in the interest rates, David, I think that spooked investors, and I think the Fed overplayed it.
Well, I'm wondering if the Fed is completely blind to the stock market, because it wasn't certainly during Ben Bernanke. I mean, it was clear that Ben Bernanke was paying attention to what the stock market was doing and acted accordingly. Is it likely that this Fed is going to do the same or not?
I hope it is. I hope the Fed is blind to everything except, you know, inflation out there. Unfortunately, I don't think that's the case. I think the Fed feels now it's its mandate to somehow pull the strings and levers and be like the Wizard of Oz behind the scene, micromanaging the economy. If
they've always felt like that, right, Gary? I mean, I don't think that's anything new. They have always felt like that. No,
absolutely, it's not new. But as they become more and more embracing their powers, if you will, they care more and more about all these other things that are going on, and I think that just screws things up.
How many more bull markets will the Fed kill? It seems over and over again.
That's a good question.
They bring an end to the party.
And the answer is, look, my fundamental disagreement, David, with the Fed is they're growth phobiacs. They believe that growth causes inflation. That's right. You and I have devoted our whole life to trying to dispute that. Growth does not cause inflation.
It's a whole
they're afraid
idea
of higher wages. They're afraid of high economic growth.
It's a whole idea of overheated economy.
Which is never nonsense. There's no such thing as overheated. I mean, you remember under Reagan, we had quarters of 8%.
Okay, I want to wonk out on you. I have a question for you. So what really does cause the inflation? You say overheating.
Too much
So the Fed actually was in jeopardy of doing that way back when.
Here, I'm old-fashioned. I go back to Paul Volcker. Volcker used essentially a commodities index to indicate whether inflation was
too wonky.
Well, but commodities are what we should look at. Commodities, and maybe the rest of you can dispute this, but if you look at commodity prices over the last year or two, they've been falling. They're not rising. Now, somebody tell me how that's an indicator of inflation, because I don't see it. I think we got deflation.
I mean, well, you've got wages inflating a little bit, but I would argue, you know, Gary, wages are where they should be, right? I mean, we all deserve a little raise here. Americans haven't had one for like 30 years.
I definitely agree. Look, you look at the three pillars of the economy. I always think it's housing prices, which are still inching up, wages, which are growing, and the unemployment rate. You have those three things, the economy's in good shape. I'd ask Steve a question, though, because it sounds like you're coming from my perspective. The Fed could plug all these numbers into an algorithm and have one guy in there hitting the button on their IBM computer.
You and I
that would take care of the Fed funds rate.
I'm 100% in agreement, and I would use the commodity price index. Anytime the commodity prices rise, then you need to.
By the way, what's wrong with just one commodity?
Because
gold.
It's too much. No, gold. I'm not a gold guy. Gold would be better, but why not use a market basket of commodities and follow those? And by the way, Volcker used that rule in the 80s. I mean, it wasn't official, but you could tell by his actions he was looking at the commodity price
historically,
index.
the Fed has been unable to, shall we say, engineer a soft landing when there's overemployment in the economy, which is where we're at this point, and there's no inflation. I mean, how
do you gauge
Right.
inflation at this point? The reason why wages have not gone up over the past 10 years because inflation hasn't gone up. And so what is the Fed reacting to? That's not.
Well,
that's
the
what
other
I'm
thing is,
concerned
let me
about.
just add something. What, because I helped put the Trump economic plan together. Our whole goal was higher wages. So how are we going to get higher wages, David and Trish, if every time we get an increase in wages, the Fed says, oh, we got to pull that back?
You know, it used to be that economists agreed on one thing and one thing only, which is the definition of inflation. Too much money chasing too few goods. We got plenty of goods right now. The only danger, I think, is that if the trade situation gets so bad that China
but that's a
stops
big
sending
if.
us
That's a big
anything,
if.
that could cause inflation.
You know, and I understand that the markets may, in some ways, and you look at the sell-off in tech, be reacting to concerns about that. But that's all. That's not in the here and now. You know, I look at Mr. Powell there at the Fed, and I just question whether he feels. Do you think, Steve, a certain amount of pressure to move no matter what, in part because, you know, the president, beginning, I think, in his interview with me just about 5 weeks ago, said that the Fed was his biggest threat.
Yeah, and the irony is that he picked Powell and he didn't get what he wanted. You know, he wanted somebody who was going to keep rates low. But, Gary, you made a point on what I agree with 95% of what you said. The one area, actually, I am concerned about that you mentioned is housing. The housing numbers don't look good to me, and I thought you said you thought they looked pretty good.
Well, I guess it depends on what you feel good is. Certainly, we have a I wouldn't say historic
Housing
low
starts
rate
are not
of
good?
houses. Well, no, I say, look, housing I think has leveled off, but I think we're out of a bubble. Home prices still increase, so that's why my definition of good. I think there is bubbles, certainly a part of the country, but I want to get back on and touch on one point, that inflation point. What people forget is that when they measure inflation, they look at a fixed basket of goods. I think what a lot of people are forgetting now is there's so many choices for people. They don't have to buy that fixed basket of goods. People now go, you know, back when we all were shopping in supermarkets when we were growing up, you didn't have 25,000 SKUs. You had a very limited number. So if beef went up, you're like, oh, I guess I got to pay for more.
Gary, can you see what I'm holding in my hand?
Now you have so many
here?
options.
Can you see this, Gary?
That's a flip-up phone.
This is a flip phone that's probably, 15 years old.
Right.
You know, this costs like, $159 when I bought it. Now you get an iPhone that has 1,000 times the power of it, and yet this Consumer Price Index thinks this is the same as the iPhone.
That's just a prop, right? That's not actually your phone.
Let me just finally pull back and ask one question, because we do have different people saying different things about the economy.